Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture.
Well, greetings. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. We
Is
are
it safe to say the boys are back in town?
the dynamic duo today. You heard the voice of Alexis, who is actually not here. And of course, Jessica is still off today. So it's just the boys. Does that mean we can do and say what we want, Brett? Or will the evidence give us away in the future?
The pod has become the man cave. Is that what people say?
I guess so. Yes, we have tilted the ship in the other direction. Our balance is completely lost today on the two guys that are here.
Well, yeah, the other two had more important things to do, and they just sort of propped us up and gave us some mics to do this. Is the reality.
They're like, listen, we know that the production value is going to go way down, but we want you to go ahead and do this episode anyways. You know, they let us know that. They did not say that, but
well, Ray, I have a question. Did you? A few episodes back, we talked with Jack from the Kentucky Department of Forestry, Urban Forestry Initiative work. And we said we were going to go out and sit under a tree. Have you done that yet?
I've sit under a few trees since that time, actually. Yeah, okay. I've sat there, but now I didn't do it for an extended period of time like I think we talked about. Yeah.
Well, I mean, any period of time. What kind of trees were you sitting under?
Well, I put up my hammock several days ago, and I attached one into a plum tree and one into a June apple tree, and it's sitting under there technically, but I will lay in the hammock and look through the canopy up at the sky and just not think about a whole lot.
Oh, man. Yeah, I think laying under it is like the next level. You know, that's even more
Tom Sawyer level. I mean, you're not only just, sitting there, you're reclining there,
Yeah, put in an aluminum fence that doesn't require any painting and then sit on and so it's like a...
No, I have the wooden fence that isn't desperate needs. I look right at it and it's leaning, but I try to ignore the fact of maintenance. I do. I've not yet found someone to trick them into painting that. But just give me enough time and motivation. I'll make it.
What other, you said you sat under trees a couple of times. Where else were you under a tree?
I was probably, I was able to take a little trip or two. One of my favorite local areas, and I've mentioned before, is Red River Gorge. I was able to go there and walk under the tree canopy and sit under the tree canopy and enjoy that over, I'll try to find some nice overlook that looks over some distance. And I love that, being up on, high places with some, I believe it was Virginia pines that I was sitting under last. And that was pretty nice. Places with a lot of constant airflow. And I love that sound blowing through. So yeah, I got some of that in. And that's always nice when I'm kind of feeling stressed or life gets a little too busy. That's usually my fallback.
You really rose to the challenge.
Yeah, I did. It's more of a constant retreat for me when things get busy.
That was like the easiest thing for you.
Yeah,
it was like telling you to eat dinner or something.
No, it's like eat lunch. I'm like, I've got this. I will do this, and I know Brett's going to ask about it. How about you? Did you accomplish any of these things?
I sat. We have a nice old but small dogwood in our backyard, and and I made the explicit intention to go out and sit there and just kind of look. It's also the place where I was sitting is from a different vantage point than where I usually sit in the yard. And just if you haven't ever seen our yard, there's a lot of visual interest in different arches and plants and obviously the bonsai and the structures and stuff like that. So seeing it from a different perspective than the usual was kind of cool. And yeah, really nice. Unfortunately, we're heading into mosquito season. We're in it now. But they don't bother me too bad, but unfortunately they bother Annie. But yeah, it was a lovely little, and I'm glad I did it. Little experience. So again, at the end of the episode with Jack, a couple episodes ago, we challenged ourselves and our listeners to go out and just sit under a tree and do nothing else besides just sitting under there and
not allowed to have your phone out.
Yeah, just feeling and if you want to think. If not, if you just want to breathe and be, and yeah. So I wanted to check in on our intention there. And I wanted to put Alexis on the spot about it, but we can hold that off till maybe the next episode when she gets back with us.
We need to hold her accountable. So let's see if
someone's got to.
I'm thinking
reign of
she may be
terror
the
is
guilty
over.
party. Yes, she has
Yeah.
maybe not accomplished that. I don't wanna put that on her. I will let her speak for herself when she
Yeah, she's
comes
like, "What if
back.
I
So
like do some analysis of some spreadsheets while I'm doing that?" And like,
she's like,
no,
"I
that's
sat
not.
under the canopy of the high tunnel and reflected on all the work that I have yet to do." I'm like, "No, that's not it,
I
Alexis."
was
No.
steaming inside the high tunnel.
Yes.
It was
Yeah, the
80
sauna.
degrees and 80% humidity.
Thinking, that I need to bring the temperature down post haste.
Well,
Yes.
seeing as it's just the two of us, and we were trying to think of, what do we maybe want to talk about, and I started to realize that most of what I know about this man, this myth, this legend, Ray Tackett, has been, I would say, at the earliest, probably since 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, and then
Mm.
much more over the last 5 years or so, I guess, since about maybe 2020 or so, and little tip snippets here and there um, from the podcast here, and from hanging out and seeing each other, and getting together more often. But I wanted to I hoped you would indulge me and our audience with a little bit of a trip down your horticultural, agricultural past, the path
Oh,
to
sure.
your agricultural past, and so I'll open by asking. This is a difficult one, so feel free to
Oh,
take a second,
man.
or maybe it's
Start with
not.
the hard one.
Maybe you
Start
all
with the
always
hard ones
surprise
first.
me. But what is your first concrete memory of plants?
Of plants, man, that's I don't know, they've always been there. I'm the fish swimming through the water, and I don't recognize the water. I'm trying to think as far as a definitive in memory, of specific plants. I mean, had to be I mean, I think a lot about we had this old dairy barn that was on the farm that, I grew up on, and there was hay fields, and so I remember like the pokiness, the stick. We went without shoes in the summer a lot when we were just running around the fields and stuff. But how sticky and pokey the fresh cut hay fields were, and the smell of hay, that's
Mm.
pretty strong. And I love the smell of fresh cut hay to this point. But it was a grass hay field, primarily grass hay, with a little bit of clover in it. But I remember the smell of that. That's one of my absolute earliest memories. And
Hmm.
it was outside of what we called the old dairy barn, this old barn with a field next to it. And probably one of the earliest ones I can think of specifically involving plants. Yeah.
Hmm.
Did you have one, Brett? I mean,
This isn't about me, my friend. We're not turning
oh
this back
man,
on me.
we're
This
gonna
is a
go back and
profile.
forth.
This is a profile in agriculture
Oh, okay.
of Ray
Not a
Tackett.
reflective piece. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if
Life
people
and
like
times.
this, if people like this style and they want a considerably more boring version, we can do one where I'm the one getting interviewed.
Yeah, you got some great history too there, Brett Wolf.
Well, so how many cows were in that dairy barn?
As far as that one, probably 45, 50 head that time, mama cows and cow calf pairs. Black
Okay.
Angus. It was a Black Angus farm, registered Angus farm that I grew up on. So yeah, at any one time in that one particular area, probably that many. And it was one of the older barns on the farm, but also one of the cooler ones because it was a kind of an old fashioned barn with these big concrete foundations, had a full loft, and I loved to go climb up in the loft. And when there was hay up in there, I'd always go to that barn when it was raining, and I'd kind of find me a little spot in the hay and kind of curl up and look out the barn loft opening and just watch the rain.
Hmm.
Just watch it come down. But yeah, at any one time in that area, probably about that many cattle.
So
Yeah.
this is a dairy barn that is on your family's farm.
Yeah, not my family's farm. It's the farm that I grew up on, and then it was actually, and I didn't know it at the time. It was an extension specialist farm. He was a forage specialist, and I didn't know what an extension was
Hmm.
at a super early age. But actually grew up on an extension specialist's farm, forage specialist, and learned, on down the road by when I got older to appreciate such things that, he worked through the University of Kentucky. And I think he was stationed out of our substation in Quicksand, Kentucky, Robinson Forest Quicksand substation
So
area.
was that farm and was that farm in what county was that in? What part of
Johnson
Kentucky?
County, Johnson County. Yeah, in the eastern part of the state. Yep.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And you said you grew up on that farm. So were your
Mm.
parents were working on that farm too, or were
Yeah, Dad, of course, managed the farm there because, being an extension person, the person traveled a lot, traveled the state, had statewide responsibilities. So Dad had to take care of the farm, and we managed all the crops and had the tobacco crop, and took care of the cattle. And we would see that person once every couple of months, maybe once every 3 months, and they would just stop by to see how things were going. And we lived on the farm there and took care of everything. Um,
so that was the extension specialist person. That was his own farm.
Yes, that was one
Okay.
of the farms that he owned. That was in part of his family's farm, part of it, and part of it was kind of pieced together, which is pretty common in that area. You kind of combine farms.
Okay.
Um,
And so you were going to public schools there in town?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Central Elementary, just a little uh, elementary school there, which we didn't have. You know, middle school or anything. You we went all the way through 8th grade and then straight into high school. Which my son, who's going to be 11 this year, he just can't believe that. He's, what about middle school? You didn't change? I was like, no, buddy, it was all elementary school then. But very, very school. Had great academics and just a little school there in Paintsville, Kentucky. Yeah.
Yeah. I went to Catholic school, but it was all
Mm.
one through,
Oh,
first
was
through
it?
eighth grade as well. And so when I learned that other people went to middle school, I was kind of
Uh,
confused.
I know when that first, started happening and people would talk about middle school, I was like, do what now? So not everybody goes like K through 8th grade. And kindergarten was not a thing for me. I started straight in 1st grade. I mean, I didn't go to kindergarten. It was just, during that time period in I guess that would have been late 70s, early 80s. I mean, 1st grade, kindergarten was not mandatory, and through 8th grade, and then later on through the county school there, Johnson Central.
Your kindergarten was a real garten, for kinder.
Yeah, it was not for me. It was not
Yeah,
for me.
children's garden, the rough translation
Yes,
of kindergarten.
it was a garden of children, but not this child.
And so, how did you balance, or like, what was the vibe of balancing helping out on the farm with going to school?
Oh man, I loved working on the farm, but we started working on the farm at a very young age. There was my older brother; he's 1 year older than me, and then I had a younger brother. He came along a little bit later, but and had one sister, and we all pretty much, when we were there, worked on the farm. And here everybody is complaining about having to go to school and looking forward to summer break. And even though I loved being on the farm, I was like, are you guys insane? We get to sit down here and there's some air conditioning in the school. I'm like, you guys are insane. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because as soon as we would get out of school, we would hit hay fields or the tobacco field, and we would work until it had gotten dark. Typical farm kid kind of lifestyle where you work early. I'd go out in the winter and feed cattle before I went to school. I'd run up to the dairy barn. If they were housed close to the house, I didn't have to drive or anything, or nobody had to drive me. I'd run up to the old dairy barn, feed the cows, climb up in the loft, and you're doing all this at 10 or 11 years old, and starting to do all of this and throwing hay down and then running back down and then catching the school bus. And then as soon as we got off the bus, we were back, at the time, chopping out tobacco or throwing square bales. We only had square bales on the farm, and I always gave my dad a hard time. He didn't switch to round bales until two of us brothers, the two oldest brothers, went away to college at the same time. Then he got a round baler. I'm like, oh, that's appropriate. Sure, you could have done this years ago, but
So
he's like,
around,
really?
around baler being something you could move, but with a machine and have fewer of
Yes.
them, and versus having two strong young boys throwing the
Yeah,
square
square
bales.
bales. Yeah, square bales much more labor intensive. It was a premium product, but yeah, much more labor intensive. And my dad's like, "Hey, free labor." He had ran the numbers, and he knew
Yep,
that he could get more out of square bales, and he had free labor. So, you economists can appreciate that.
that's great. Yeah, your dad was
Yeah.
just a smart, savvy business person.
Yes. Yeah. So summer break meant something different for us. We rarely traveled off the farm very far because there was always something to do. And so we had a lot of fun during, summer break with visiting on family and stuff, but a lot of long days on the farm. And we also had vegetables that we sold there locally. So there was always work to do. There was always something to do. And it was a rare afternoon that we just had the afternoon completely off. And My dad, he worked at a local sawmill for many years. Me growing up, oil fields and a local sawmill is what I remember the best, the sawmill. But when he would get off work, that's when the work started.
Mm.
We would because then it would be more structured. Mom would be like, "Hey, listen, you guys do this and that, and don't go too far. Take the dog with you, so you don't get lost in the woods." And he'll bring you back. But Dad would get there and he goes, "Okay, here's the 10 things that we have to get done before dark." And so away we went. So summer
Hmm.
break was a little different for us in that area. Unlike the area of central Kentucky where I'm at now, where it's predominantly, farm kids, a lot of farm kids. That's great. But when I was growing up there in the mountains, we were more in the minority as far as being a farm family and living that particular way. Where there was some other families in the school I went to, but more so not than so.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, how did that come to pass? Do you think that like you all were a farm family? Was that a function of relocation, or like how is it that your dad or your mom or you even knew how to do this stuff? Like what was that? Where did that come from?
My father grew up on a commercial farm, a bigger farm that had orchards and vineyards and all sorts of things in a section of Johnson and Lawrence County. And they had truck routes all over the eastern part of the state, and as well as like parts of Ohio and West Virginia. So he grew up in production. So it's just a part of who he was. So he was going to be involved in farming, even though he had a full time job, a very physically demanding full time job outside of the farm always. But he just loved doing it.
Mm.
And Mom grew up more of a subsistence farm where they had not market gardens, but home gardens and things. But she didn't have the same upbringing as Dad did
Mm.
because he grew up more in production, and that's just what he was accustomed to. So I guess that led us down that path.
So you mentioned that you had this farm where your dad was managing it, and then you also had the family farm.
Mhm.
What was the relationship to the family farm, or what was going on
Came
there?
after, because I mean, it'd be hard to do. On my father's side, it was more forested. My mother's side had land that was hilly, and so did my father. And they more involved hollows with little patches of sunshine that was appropriate for limited scale production.
Mm.
Very little space for grazing, but lots of timberland. So lots of land resources, just none of it flat. Dad always
Mhm.
joked that they had a lot of land. They had a lot of flat land. It was just stacked up on top of each other. Like, that's a terrible joke, Dad. It was his favorite joke. But they had lots of property on both sides of my family. But it was just not like tillable, what you consider,
Mm.
highly valued agricultural land, because it was all hillside for the most part. And it was very remote on both my mother's side and my father's side. And on my father's side, my goodness, my grandmother, like, she never had electricity. And I remember growing up going to her house, and it was like going back in time. Even, back in my earliest memories would have been the late 70s, early 80s. She just would not have electricity, didn't trust it. So that was just a time capsule. And it was an amazing, and I really appreciate those experiences now. As an amazing experience to go and see. And all they ever had was they had a huge garden on Dad's side of the family, but it was all worked with mules and mechanical labor. The disc, the plows, the cultivation, getting firewood, everything was done with mules.
Wow.
And it was just it was a very cool experience on his side of the family. And I think it was right at like a little over a mile, and there was not a road. My earliest memories, there was not a road to their homestead where grandmother lived. There was no road. It was a mile into the woods. Now later they got a very good road there where we could, and I remember it was like a special occasion the very first time we
Mm.
were able to drive to grandmother's house, and it was so different because you could actually drive to the house. My earliest memories is walking through a creek part of the way for this mile, because it was not so much brush and things in the creek to get to grandmother's house. And it was a mile into the woods in Lawrence County, Kentucky, in a very remote location.
Wow. And so that is different from the family farm, or that is the family farm?
Yes, I'd say as far as what I considered our family farm, that would have been on both sides of the family. Yeah, on my
Okay.
mother's side and father's side. Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
in Lawrence County?
Lawrence County, and then on my mother's side in Johnson County. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. And so was there, you mentioned the garden. Um, most of your, you talked about like tobacco experience, growing
Hmm.
tobacco, growing obviously some of the livestock and stuff like that. Was that those experiences mostly on the family farm or mostly on the managed farm?
Both. Most of those that I grew up on would have been the farm that Dad sort of managed. But
Mhm.
now, grandmother had chickens. She had always a couple of cattle, and a dairy cow that I would watch her milk. She would go out and milk it, which was pretty cool. I guess she was living that homestead lifestyle truly as just
Right.
normal lifestyle before everybody started doing it. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah, that she had everything. They were pretty self sufficient. They would go to the store, get a ride to the store, through neighbors or whatnot. I don't know, once every 3 or 4 months,
Yeah.
to get supplies. But that was kind of a different experience than the actual farming side, and I got to see both sides.
Mhm.
Where one was more self consumption and one was more production. You were producing things to sell, and the two things were very different. So I got to
Yeah.
kind of see both sides of it, and that's one of the things that made it so cool. I kind of saw that it was different, even though you're raising beef or you're producing milk or you're growing vegetables. For grandmother it was canning and putting up the vegetables and preserving whatever products that they had, and for our family it was selling things on a farm that Dad managed.
The more the things change, the more they stay the same. I think those are still the two primary audience. Like that represents two primary experiences we hear from our clientele today. Is
Yeah.
that there are some people who really are just interested in doing it for themselves. This homesteading thing. There's, I guess, depending on who you talk to, some romanticization maybe, but in other cases, it's just kind of that's what they want to do, all the way to, we really want to make this an efficient business and make what we can off of it. And so
Yeah, we
it's
work
just
with
so
kind of
funny
both
that
sets.
we
Yeah.
think of things as changing so much, and in reality, some of those core things, they kind of stay the same. So you mentioned, so we were there was on the farm that your dad was managing. What all was there as far as crops and livestock and everything
It
else
was a
for
cattle,
sale?
yeah, cattle and tobacco, and then we had like lots of green beans and tomatoes were the two big staple crops. At the time, it was pretty easy to sell to large commercial chains of stores, without a lot of friction between the farmer and or a lot of, paperwork or anything. You could just go and take 30 bushels of white half runner beans and just sell them. And then we had a truck route. We would deliver. We knew the people that would typically buy a pretty good quantity of vegetables, either a half a bushel or a bushel. So we'd drive around Paintsville and you would load up the truck. And basically, at the end of the day, the goal was to be sold out of whatever you had. So,
Mhm. Okay,
yeah.
so you just very casually said 30 bushels of
Hmm.
beans.
Hmm.
How many people are picking that?
Just our family.
So
My mom was a very fast green bean picker, but yeah, that was just primarily on the vegetable side. That was just 4 kids and my mother and father, every now and again an uncle or two, but that was all just us, getting out there and kind of picking through rows of green beans and taking them to market for the most
I'm
part.
not sure if people out there in the world, have picked beans before, but for that size crew, 30 bushels, I mean, that's not that's no joke.
Yeah, it definitely took some doing. I had a real aversion for green beans for many years. I never wanted to see another green bean again. I've learned to
Yeah.
love them again, but at the time, yeah, it was a chore to try
Beans,
to eat green beans.
so beans and tomatoes were
Mhm.
the main horticultural
Yeah,
staples.
the volume things we could sell in a reasonable volume that everybody wanted and needed, and it seems like we didn't have a tremendous amount of people growing those locally in that particular area at that particular time. So I'm sure that's why my dad made the decision to stick with the big safe things that he can move, in volume. I mean, he never took a chance on things like eggplant probably, because it wasn't a volume sort of thing. Because at the same time the vegetables were coming off, they were tending tobacco, and there was hay. We put up a lot of hay both for sale and for use on the farm. And then you're taking care of the cattle. So you had all these things going on with almost or very little outside labor. Very little. It was just our family was the labor, along with a couple of uncles that would help out every now and again housing tobacco.
Yeah, I mean, what you're painting to me is like the prototypical, probably 1930 to 1990-95 family farm in Kentucky.
Yeah, that's pretty much my experience, because that was about the time period. Went to college in Berea College for my undergrad. My brother and I did, older brother, at the same time. We went in 92. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's all the
Yeah.
way through, the 80s into the beginning of the 90s when we graduated high school there. And then the next year, my brother waited out a year, but we both went to college at the same time. He was 1 year ahead of me in 92. So that was it. And we didn't use, I didn't grow up with a lot of outside labor. It was all family labor,
Yeah.
one in one form or another.
For many people are kind of familiar with the idea that this period, particularly the latter half of that window I just talked about, was defined by Kentucky agriculture, defined in part by the relationship to tobacco and its role on the family farm and the way that it shifted and stuff. What were your memories about tobacco? I guess starting with how much tobacco were you all growing, and what are the things that you associate with that, or that you most remember from that period and that work in particular?
I come to appreciate, I don't know how many acres at our peak. I mean, we couldn't have been very many by today's scale, because you have fewer producers now, many more or many less producers, but they're all much bigger. Um, because of our labor, we could only grow what we could harvest. It was several acres. But
Yeah.
the thing I remember most about tobacco is that Dad would always say, well, that's what pays the bills.
Hmm.
Cattle, when they did good, it was really good. But when they were not good, I mean, cattle marketing followed kind of a cycle, even in registered herds, especially in commercial herds. But tobacco was a very consistently profitable crop year in and year out in Kentucky. And gosh, I remember, Brett, late 80s, tobacco was bringing the same price per pound as it did was 25 years later. Of
Mm.
course, you had the fertilizer prices and input prices being much cheaper then. And so you can kind of do the math there quickly in your head, that if you're getting the same price 30 years ago, that you were way more profitable. I mean, it was very profitable for small farms to have even small acreages of tobacco at $1.92 a pound, or some years over $2 a pound 30 years ago. I mean, that was doing well.
Hmm. This is it's a little bit of a delicate question, I guess. I mean, not really. It could be for some. That was there a discussion of these people are talking about the health risks of smoking? They're talking about that this might go away. Was there any anticipation of
No.
that, or when that might have started?
And I've thought a lot about that, but while we were producing it, it never entered our minds. It was
Hmm.
just, once again, the fish swimming in the water you
Sure.
don't think about. It's just, and it was not uncommon for a lot of people that most of my family smoked. None of us kids ever did. I don't know why, but we didn't in our family. But mom and dad both smoked. All the uncles smoked. And when I'd go to high school, there was a huge smoking area that most of the high school kids smoked.
Hmm.
Smoked a lot. So no, that came about later on when you know I guess at some point that all changed. But no, we never saw the end. And fortunately, we were not around for that. As far as producing, we didn't have to go through that transition and period of uncertainty when all that started happening. When the program changed in Kentucky, that was after we were off the farm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you mentioned early '90s. You're going away to school, and that
Yeah.
was kind of that mid to late '90s that big shift happened. And
Yeah. Late 90s. Yeah. That all started really changing. And, we started understanding the health effects of all those things. And I was watching an apple shop. Goodness, an apple shop. It's organization here in Kentucky does a lot of has a lot of historical video footage, and they had some of those specials on, considering that all the way back 40, 50 years ago. And it was
Mhm.
really interesting about, the production versus, the health ramifications and all this, that, and the other. But by and large, we were just, producing it. It was a stable crop. Is kind of how my dad looked at it, that and if that would have been another crop like corn, he would have done that. If he could have made the
Sure.
same amount of money, he would have grown whatever. But our primary consideration in that part of the state was, what can we do on, essentially was a small scale. Total size of the farm was 400 or 500 acres, a lot of that being woodland with a fair amount of hay ground and river bottoms and things. But well, what can you essentially do on smaller acres that was appropriate? That, we talked about scale in a former episode, and it was all about scale. What could you produce, like vegetables? And we could do vegetables fairly well because it was all family labor. We didn't have
Mhm.
much labor cost. And we could do tobacco because it was very consistent, and there was a program in place to control price
Right.
for the most part. The tobacco program was in place at that
Mhm.
time. So yeah, it was different when we were there, and I come to appreciate that when I would go to my ag econ courses at Berea, and we talked a lot about scale and what you can do. And 1,000 acres in one place is not the same
Mm.
as 1,000 acres in another place, depending on the enterprise.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, talk about a structural level conflicted feelings, or feeling conflicted that this was this essential crop to the economy of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And not only to the economy of Kentucky, but specifically to the small farms of Kentucky. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's this emergent, oh, turns out here's all these problems associated with it. And not to mention the fact that there's a climactic advantage to growing it here. So it would sort
Mm-hmm.
of be like saying, going to the south of France and saying, yeah, I know it's perfect to grow wine here or grapes here for wine, but you got to shut it down because of this, this thing. And so it's just such a fascinating transitional period. And I think, we're talking about, you and I have been talking a little bit about how to maybe explore that with some of the people who were there,
Mm-hmm.
and talk through that. And I'm hoping that that ends up panning out. If that's something you all would be interested in hearing, drop a comment and let us know, or an email letting us know that you might, that tobacco transition period, is in a separate context.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll get into that a little bit. So you through the into the 90s, you decided you were going to go, or late 80s and into the 90s, you decided you're going to go to college, and
Sure.
you went to Berea College.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will have heard of Berea. It definitely has a worldwide reputation, and people know about it. But like, what's unique about it? Why did you choose it? And did it have anything? Was there any carryover with your agricultural upbringing there?
Sure, you don't think about it like a lot of kids that may or may not have grown up on farms, but we grew up on a farm, and I was like, man, the last thing I want to do is, I'm going to go to college and get away from that. But what you don't realize is that it comes full circle in a lot of cases. When I first went to Berea, I was very interested in biology. I was determined I was going to be a biology major. I was very interested in systems and ecology, environmental systems. So I really wanted to focus on that. But what that turned into later on was a degree in plant, a split degree in plant and animal sciences at Berea, almost 50-50, a little bit heavier in the horticultural side, the plant side, because that's where my, interest kind of were at.
Mm.
But when I went to Berea, one thing led to another. From a bio major, I went over to agriculture, because I think you could do more with that degree without a PhD in some cases, and it seemed to be more practical. And I would like to think of myself as a very practical person. But when I went through Berea and ended up working on the farm there at Berea a couple of summers full time, because I enjoyed it. I learned that once I was off the farm for a couple of years, I sort of missed it, which really surprised me. I was like, "What
Mm.
am I doing?" I said I was done with all of that, and here I came right back to it. And in my career,
If you had to describe what you think it is that you missed about it, What was it, do you think?
Probably just the connectivity to the land
Mm,
and growing things and producing things and seeing the cycle of growing things. And I guess that's why I'm on the plant side more so, is that, here in Kentucky, there's spring and summer and fall and winter season for plant production, and it's very cyclical.
mhm,
And I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the connectivity of growing things and the way it connected you to the land. I
mhm,
still very interested, in some of the work I've done in the state for many years was more in forestry and environmental systems. Very interested in that too, but I think that's what brought me back to it. I mean, I always took for granted when I was younger that just every family worked side by side for 14 hours a day. I was there beside my brothers and sisters, and boy, we fought sometimes, my brothers and I especially, and our sister would keep us in line. But I just took for granted that everybody was with their family 24 hours a day. But I quickly learned that wasn't the case. And I think that attracted me back, back around to that as far as my enjoyment, bringing me back
mm.
to that, really thinking about it once I was off the farm. Yeah.
And Berea College is it sort of has central to it is, I guess, something we would call work study or something
Yes.
similar. But
Yeah.
there's a general. I mean, what would you describe as kind of the ethos of Berea College, or the reason for its existence, or what?
Learn by doing, I would say,
Mm,
and when I switched over to ag, that was never more true because I worked full time on the college farm in areas that I hadn't worked on before. Even though I grew up on a farm and swine operations and things like that, and plant propagation, I got to even at a feed mill, I learned to run a feed mill on my own. I mean, some really great experiences working there and having lots of essentially a lot of responsibilities in the summertime when the full-time workers were not necessarily there. It
mm,
was college labor for the most part. But yeah, Berea's a work-study college. It's learn by doing. It's not the only one. There's several in the United States. But and that's one of the things that attracted me to Berea was its smaller size and the fact that there was I think they call it, placing value and dignity on, labor.
mm.
And that
Yeah.
was one of their tenets of Berea College that I think is very applicable even today. But I enjoyed that because I was a very hands-on, tactile sort of person, and that made sense to me. And I remember I would probably cringe now, and I wish I'd have saved it, but I'm pretty sure when they were asking about, like, Berea and your skills and talents, I think I put fencing, barbed wire fencing on part of that.
Oh
And there's
no.
not too many colleges now that would impress. But at Berea, I remember the admissions officers there pulled that, and he cited that, and he said, this is what we're looking for. And I was like, what? But he was more talking about the work ethic than the specific
I see.
skill.
I thought you were gonna. I thought it was setting up for a horror story of you having to go out
No.
and run fences for.
No, no, no. I did a lot of different labor jobs there at Berea, but they wanted to know things like that because the admissions, it was kind of tough. It was a very selective process at the time. I don't know how that flows now, but it was really unusual for my brother and I both to have gotten into Berea. But yeah, I remember I'd probably cringe now if I read that on some of my skills that made me appropriate for Berea. I, I mean, fencing. Who would have thought that running fences you would put on a college application? But they wanted to know more like work ethic and, like I said, the dignity of labor. And so I just put it all out there, and it was handwritten at the time, of course, being the early 90s, it was not typed out on a computer. And that was my application to Berea College. So
Well, I think they had the seem to have the experience that a lot of people have had since that I know, which is they wanted the authentic Ray Tackett, and that was what they got. Was I can do some fencing,
yeah, I
and
can
also
do some stuff on the farm. Hey, if you need me to
that's
be farm
awesome.
labor, I can do that. But I did a lot of things besides farm labor there. I
Sure.
worked in woodcraft and worked as a janitor in dorms, which I enjoyed that too. But all labor positions, there's so many different labor positions there at the college. So they still have a very similar program as when I went through all those years ago. And that jived really well with me being a farm kid. That
Hmm.
I felt right at home from day one there in the program.
Were you the first? The first you and your brother, the first people in your family to go to college?
Yes. Yes, we were the very first ones. We were first years. So,
What was it that drove that decision? Do you think?
we for whatever reason, we We're in lots of academic programs, extracurricular academic programs at school, and academic team sort of things. We had like strong youth group leaders, growing up that really encouraged us to make that a consideration you know, uh, make that a consideration for going forward in life, that your education is important. You need to take it serious. And that was from about eighth grade, freshman year in high school. We had these church youth group leaders that really kind of instilled that on us. And they were educators themselves. And that probably had a big impact on us with the way that we focused on, we were aware of academics and it being important for us to make that consideration, and even later on, I had a third brother that went and graduated from Berea in Ag and Natural Resources. He did not go into agriculture. He went into hotel management, which is a little bit different. But yeah, there was three of us from my family that went through the same program there.
So what I heard was we were too nerdy not to go to college.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like there's no spot for us. We are like these nature nerds that like books as well.
Yeah,
But yeah, yeah,
you like the
yeah.
academic thing and it's another just not necessarily every story is different, but I think there's a lot of folks in your to my age range who had that experience of having that opportunity even open to them for the first time
Yeah.
and taking it and seeing what it led to.
It's sort of novel and different. Yeah. I mean, it was like a grand adventure. Yeah.
Yeah. Were you all scared?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it wasn't very far away from home now that I reflect on it, but I ask a lot of questions. I remember that when the admission officer, they used to have admissions officers, and I think they're going back to this model that would come around and talk to prospective students and identify, and they really interviewed you months before the application even and talked to us. And I had really practical questions like, how am I going to get my laundry done if I go to this place? Like I wanted to know real world because I was super nervous. There was no one in my family I could talk to that had that experience. So I was like, I mean, how do you get food, food and shelter? And so I had all these basic questions that was really new to me. Now that I look back, it was really basic, but yeah, it was a frightening experience at first, but that went away in about 2 or 3 weeks. I was like, oh, we're taken care of. We're in this environment where they have smart people have planned all of this stuff out. And, here's how you accomplish your daily routine and, get the job done. So
what was that conversation about going away to college like with your parents and the family farm?
there was really no pressure.
Or not the family farm, but any of the farm work.
Yeah, the farm. I mean, there was really no pressure one way or another. They were very neutral on that. My dad, who was great, and dad and mom, and they were both like, you guys have to follow what you really feel passionate about. Either way, they wanted to let us know, formal education or not. They said, you need to make the considerations, weigh the pros and the cons and do what you feel passionate about. Because if you're, they instilled us at an early age, if you're passionate about getting a higher education, then go for it. Definitely go with that. Nobody's ever had the opportunity. You guys seem to have the ability. You're a bunch of nerds. Go for it. Dad's like always, he used to tell us, keep your hands in the dirt, but your head in the clouds, kind of thing. And I remember that. He said, you can do this if you want to do it. So, yeah.
That's pretty, yeah, I don't want to just gloss over that that's really powerful. So I'm looking at the time here and I'm realizing this is definitely going to have a part two. And we'll be sure to do that. But you go through Berea, you learn these new things, you have these new life experiences. I assume 4 years go by quickly in the blink of an eye.
They do,
maybe.
blink of an eye. Yeah.
So now what does newly minted college graduate Ray Tackett look out to the world and see and think about doing?
Well, I mean, first of all, that's a real shocker. You start to make plans your senior year, about a month left. You're like, holy cow, it is getting real. Well, I had put in an application to Extension, and I mean, that was because Extension had representatives that would come around to colleges and recruit for Extension. And I didn't think a lot about it. I made a basic application and forgot about it. It was months later that I heard back from that. But I immediately after college started working at a local landscape company, very active, bigger landscape company in Madison County, and worked my way up to sort of a management position where I was managing crews, and very good work. I learned a ton in a short amount of time on things like mowing crews and managing crews, and also landscape installation on a commercial level, and learned to bid jobs, and really loved my experience there. But months and months later, into the winter, I heard back from this person at the university that said, "Hey, we got your application." And at first I said, "What are you talking about?" And because I'd forgotten all about it, being a young person, because 6-10 months is like forever. But I guess at the time, and I didn't know it, Extension in Kentucky had been on a sort of a hiring freeze for a period of time, and then all of a sudden the floodgates opened. They were hiring all of these people, and I got a call. And that's, I came in for an interview, and one thing led to another, and got a position with a cooperative extension service here in Kentucky. So
And
that's
what was
sort of how
that?
I got into
Was that an
extension.
agent position?
An agent's position. I was really interested. And at the time, they really didn't differentiate between horticulture agents and ag agents, because there was no such thing as hort agents. There might have been two in the state, and those were special sort of agent positions in urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
So that not being a thing at the time, and me having an animal and plant science kind of a split degree from Berea, they loved that sort of degree, because we have to cover both of those things as an ag and natural resources agent in Kentucky. So that gave me a real advantage, and I was able to get a ag and natural resources agent position in Grant County, Kentucky, the northern part of the state.
Okay,
That
that's
was
where Alexis comes from, right?
Yeah. Coincidentally, yeah. So I'm gonna have to go up there and like kick around her family's, closet, the skeletons or something. But it is a small world, and it's so interesting that years apart, my wife went through there as well and became an agent, like
Oh
my
man,
Jennifer. Yeah. So small world. A lot of
it's
people
like
apparently
Grant
filter
County is
through.
the place where you have to go. I haven't yet had my life, my key life moment in Grant County yet.
What's it
It's like
called? Is it what's on the water tower? Gateway to the Bluegrass? Maybe it's just a gateway in general. Maybe it's a
maybe
filter.
so.
Yeah.
I need to go up there and consult the Oracle or whatever it is the rest of you all have done up
I don't
there.
know. Maybe it's Eagle Creek. I don't know. But that was my first agent's position. I spent about 4 years there and really enjoyed my time there.
And that would have
Just
been
loving it.
96
Yeah, 96 through
through
2000.
2000, which is
Yeah.
again that period of crazy change in Kentucky agriculture.
Radical change and a lot of unknowns, a lot of questions. When the tobacco program was ending, that was, the state's most stable, one of the most profitable, consistently profitable crops, that was tied into the heritage and identity of the state, just to put it in short. And to say that that was a sea change is kind of underselling it. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the the ocean shifting completely under your feet kind of moment. And a lot was changing at that time. And boy, when I first came into Extension, you had these big tobacco meetings and things, and these meetings were huge. Usually your biggest meeting of the year, as far as having producers in one room. You would have, all the different tobacco specialists, and there was a lot of them at that time. You would have these big meetings and sponsored type meetings. And all of that was, started changing slowly over the years, where, it started to shift away, but it did take years to shift away from that sort of paradigm.
Well, I think we'll leave the people on a cliffhanger there with the next chapter of your career in extension and seeing that agricultural landscape shift. And so again, we will be doing a part 2 because I want to hear the second half of this story. If you've enjoyed this, please leave us a comment down below. You can follow us on Instagram. It's Horticulture Podcast. I do have one more question for you, Ray. So don't fall asleep.
Oh man, I was getting ready to clock out.
You can follow us on Instagram. That's Horticulture Podcast. You can also email us at the email address in the show notes if you want to get in contact with us and let us know that you like this episode or you're looking for something different. But I guess my last question for you, Ray, is we've reflected on this basically first, quarter, hopefully, of your life, and thought about the idea of growing up working side by side with your family, 14 hours a day, being around your family all that time,
It's a lot of
being a
time.
farm kid and summer vacation not meaning I could hang out on the couch all summer and do nothing. You thinking about even the concept of growing stuff. You mentioned in a previous episode about the tobacco swag that your dad gave you a little small plot that you could kind of take care of and sell, and thinking about that idea of business. And if you had to think about some of the key ways that way of coming up, or that way of living, have impacted your life, or some of the key lessons from that period, in a general sense, that as you've had your own children and got married and had your own children and taught lots of new people new things and worked in careers in a different spaces, different counties, etc. Are there any particular things that you look back and you're like, I'm really grateful for those things that I learned from growing up the way I did?
Probably more than anything at an early age, you learn really quickly, and through my father, and he was really good about balancing this, and mother. They work side by side in the fields, but dad's like, one of the first things you have to sort out in this farming thing, this production thing. He said some things are in your control and some things are out of your control, and
Mm,
you have to know the difference. So, talking about like the weather, you have these crops on the outside, and you can plan for every contingency. And that one spring you're going to have a flood during calving season, or it's going to be super dry right as the tobacco's in mid season, and it'll put on the poundage that you need. And he said, control the things you can control and accept the rest.
mm,
So yeah, that's an early lesson with farming. You
yeah.
know, learn that real early, and that's a tough one. And it's tough to accept that every single year that things don't go according to plan. It is. So that's one of the early ones, man. Some
Yeah.
things you just plan and try to manage the risk the best you can. But that's not saying that you're going to ever control all the variables. Not in farming.
Yeah. No, not in anything. And I think
No, no.
that hence the carryover, and hence the fact that that's kind of a precept of many different world philosophies and religions.
Mhm.
It feels like a very Zen concept, a Zen Buddhist concept. It feels like the prayer of Saint Francis,
Yes,
serenity to accept the things I can't change, and courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
that's the
It
one.
feels yeah, really, like, again, another powerful, in addition to keeping your hands in the ground and your head in the clouds, which is a very beautiful image, and I think describes the way that I've seen you live your life. Man, this was so enjoyable. I really I really appreciate you sharing all this stuff about your experience, and I know our audience is going to really enjoy it too. But I'm looking forward to doing part 2, where we talk about the great agricultural transition of late 90s, early 2000s, and also
We may
your
still be in that transition. I'm not for sure if it ever ended. It was that powerful, people, and that was late 90s. That was the 1900s.
yeah. It was
I
that
think
was
young
back in the
people would say
1900s, kids.
back in the 1900s, and we still, I think, are going through a bit of transition. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to that. And thank you all again for listening. Get in contact with us. Let us know what you like. Please rate the episodes, and we'll see you next time.